Immediately after the war, there was a shortage of teachers, and John Laird was the Director of Education for the Stewartry and asked my mother to take over the infant class in Twynholm School in 1947. So they all knew my father, and they all knew my mother because either she had taught them in primary 1, 2, or 3, or she had taken them for singing or dancing further up the school. So combined with the name Good, I wasn't a winner. I could chap on the door of somebody that I hadn't seen for perhaps up to 70 years and say, "Hello, I'm Janet Good. Are you Dougie?" And there would be a momentary look of surprise, whereupon I would be immediately invited in, frequently accompanied by, "You're that like your mother." Contributors in person ranged in distance from Newton Stewart to Annan, while others from further afield, including Canada and Australia, contributed by email. Sometimes we gathered in small groups, blethering, with me scribbling down notes, or me visiting individuals, but all the while encouraging people to write down their own memories. And what was nice was the number of men who put pen to paper. In September 24th, will this work? Yes. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. No, back one. No, it was the group photo. Back. Anyhow, I'll just keep on talking. In September 2024, that's just over a year ago, we had our first gathering in Twynholm Village Hall. That was tremendous fun. And it's not coming up on the thing, no. At that gathering, we have a photograph of all the people who it turned up. I mean, there were lots of friends as well, but we took a photograph of the people who were of that age group. And there were 16 men and 14 women. And I would have to say that what I've said already, the men actually were the one who came up trumps when it came to writing things. We had a repeat gathering in April this year for the launch of the finished book. Now, this was a book by us and for us, and so in big print for failing eyes. The book is a collection of stories of life in our childhood, but given that our talk tonight is to a history society, we have tried to marshal it a bit more formally into different subjects. Health, the war, food, houses, clothes, agriculture, and if there's time, bits and pieces. Of course, any one of these subjects could be an evening's presentation on its own, but tonight we're giving it a whistle-stop tour over the whole lot. Things to keep in mind. Money was scarce for everybody. Many houses still didn't have running water. Few houses had telephones or motor cars. There were no clothes washing machines, no refrigerators, no deep freeze, no microwaves, no TV. Clothes were expensive and only made out of natural fibres, all washed by hand. Most people grew their own vegetables, and most of us were home births because the National Health Service still hadn't been founded. Now, tonight we are very lucky to have 4 of our contributors who will help give an idea of various aspects of both our and our parents' lives in the period between 1945 and 1955. In 1945, our oldest contributors would have been 8, and the youngest only newly born. And consequently, in 1955, there would be 18 and 10. So that's the age group that we're talking about over the period of 10 years. Representing that diversity, we have Anna Wallace, now Anna Finlay, and Joe Glass, both who now stay in Dumfries. Alistair Smith, who now stays in Castle Douglas, and Alec Irving from the parish of Twynholm still. First of all, we're going to have Anna come forward and read an article which Margaret Glover, or Margaret Purdy from Castle Douglas, wrote. And Anna is going to read this for us. All right. Wait a minute, I want to go back. Oh, sorry. That's it. Can you go back? Another one. Well, yeah. Yes. Right.
I'm reading this on behalf of Margaret Glover. Miss Allen was the district nurse during the war years, followed by Miss Strachan. The nurse's house was a bungalow on the left of the village hall. They played vital roles in the community with home confinement, attending the home when required, and diagnosing child illnesses like whooping cough, measles, and chickenpox. Cuts and bruises were seen to at the nurse's house. She also visited the school to check our heads for nits and cleanliness. Families in the village couldn't afford to call the doctor unless it was a really serious illness, so the district nurse was always busy. Anecdotally, when the district nurse was once sent for to attend a home birth, she told the caller that she'd come when she'd finished cleaning her brasses. This was a story that was often retold by the women in the village. I remember Dr. Johnny McMinn walking or shuffling out to Twynholm from Kirkcudbright to attend to his patients. When his son David McMinn took over, he had a car. Thankfully, the NHS was gratefully appreciated when it commenced in 1948. Doctors Rutherford and Rutherford, Mr. and Mrs., took up the first posts and often attended Twynholm. My mother from our home at Glenlee helped the district nurse by storing and issuing national dried milk, oyster milk, cod liver oil, and bottles of orange juice and rosehip syrup, and until it was removed as it was rotting the teeth. Miss Miller was the school dentist, and all pupils had their teeth checked and treatment carried out when it was required. The dental caravan came to the school, and we were all terrified. During the war years, all the school children were issued with gas masks. We took them to school and were trained in the use of them. Blackouts were a must, and I remember no lights at night, and hearing the German planes droning overhead on their way to bombing at Clydebank. My cousin Olive Glover was born on the 8th of May, 1948, and on the 8th of May, 1945...
38, sorry.
Oh, 38, yes, sorry. Olive Glover was born on May the 8th, 1938, And on the 8th of May, 1945, she thought that the national school holiday was for her 7th birthday. We often laughed about that. Next to our home, Glenlee.
We'll just leave that now.
Pardon?
Okay, that was we'll stop there.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Anna. There are two themes here. Oops, sorry. Right. There are two themes here: healthcare and the war. We were all born before the introduction of the National Health Service in 1948. We were almost all born at home, and even in the mid-50s, my two younger sisters were still born at home. And all our old folks died at home. There were no old folks' homes in these days. As well as mumps, measles, whooping cough, and chickenpox, there would be incidences of nits, scabies, impetigo, ringworm, with the inevitable gentian violet advertising your degree of untouchability. Tuberculosis had been a very dreadful scourge, but due to medical advancements, it was slowly being eradicated. But Margaret Murray, the youngest of three sisters, was found out that she and her mother both had contracted TB. Margaret was in my class at school. But this was before, when she was a very little girl. Both were sent to the sanatorium at Lochmaben, where her mother died and she remained. Her father was left looking after two young girls, with a third 40 miles away. Like all working people, from labourers to bank managers, everyone worked a 5.5-day week. Saturday morning was a work day for everybody. So getting to Lochmaben by public transport must have been extremely difficult. And Margaret only returned to the family when her father was allocated a 1950s newly built council house up the Doon. It was also the time of the last serious national outbreak of polio in the late 1940s. Two of our schoolmates, Ian McCurley and Donald Brown, at different times ended up with a polio-affected arm. And one of my dear friends has a lifelong debilitating limp due to contracting polio in that outbreak. The other theme that Margaret mentions is that of the Second World War. Given that our birth range was between 1937 and 1945, only the older members of our group have any clear memories of wartime. But all of us were affected in many ways in the immediate post-war years. Margaret mentions being taught in school how to use a gas mask. Stamp your feet if anyone here tonight remembers either owning their own gas mask or remembers family having it. Thank you. Mary Grace mentions her father being away in the Royal Marines, as were various other fathers, Aoife Roberts' dad, Anna's dad, Drab Heron's dad. That was quite usual. Mary Grace also tells of the evacuees coming to stay. Two evacuees arrived from Guernsey and lived with her family for 4 years during the war. And one or two other Twynholm families also hosted evacuees. Imagine the adjustments that must have been required for the children, for the parents, and for the host families. Anna herself was evacuated as a very young girl to stay with an aunt in Ayrshire, because at that time she had been living in Warrington. Another feature was that the Ministry of Works passed the Emergency Powers Defence Act of 1939, and in 1943 requisitioned part of the glebe, as they were desirous of erecting a hostel for wartime purposes. These huts never seemed to have had any serious security, and post-war were used to house displaced persons, largely men from Poland unable to return after the war had ended. The men were taken out to local farms in lorries, and David Robson recalls sometimes getting a lift to school on a returning lorry. Later on, others remember being able to join the occupants on occasional cinema nights, a real treat for children who still knew nothing about television. So how did the war affect us as young children? It's only on reflection that we can look back and know that all of our families were in the same boat. Money was scarce for everybody. But because we were all in the same boat, we accepted it without thinking. It was the norm. Food rationing was introduced during the war and continued in part until tea was lifted in 1952, sugar and eggs the next year, and in 1954, cheese and meats finally became generally available and ration books ended. As children, our contribution to the war effort was to gather rosehips, which were sent off to be made into rosehip syrup. This was a government project to ensure that every child had a vitamin C boost. I understand that this proved to be valuable, especially in inner cities.
Good evening. Learning that the going rate for collecting rose hips was threepence a pound, I decided to go out and make my fortune. So armed with a khaki bag, shoulder bag, most folk had them left over from the war, I set off to collect them. You'd take them to the headmaster's house, and after being cut and scratched and bleeding, I arrived and saw my fortune disappear when it tipped the scales at £1 3 ounces. I got my threepence and decided to donate the 3 ounces to the cause and headed for Mrs. Patterson's shop with, as well as my scratched body, my dignity, heart.
Oh,
Hey, you're saying Mary's right.
oh, sorry.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm jumping ahead here. My fault. Right. This is Geoffrey Anderson's wartime ration book. We were brought up in the war and post-war area, and food was dictated in part by the ration book. Basics like tea, flour, sugar, margarine, meat could only be bought with your rations, and sweeties. On the other hand, it was the norm for Twynholm families to grow much of their own fruit and vegetables. Oops. Now, something I want to mention here is down in the right-hand corner, you will see a white blob. That was the man's cow. And since it's in a photograph, I just want to say two things very quickly. Cows were all Ayrshire cows. Milking cows were all Ayrshire cows in these days. They all had horns. There were no dehorned Ayrshire cows, and this cow was not dehorned. And just in the off chance that Ginty Tuvey from Perth, Australia, is on Zoom at the moment, I am not going to tell the story of her encounter with the man's cow, in case there's anybody here who's a little bit squeamish, and we don't want any medical incidents. But happily, Janet is recovered and is fit and well, still in Perth, Australia. But actually, this is perhaps a better one, same one, but slightly different. If you look at every garden look at all the houses in the top of it, look at their gardens, they're all dug. And round about the church and every single garden is dug over. It was obviously springtime, but every garden grew their own vegetables, not all of enough vegetables for the whole year, but many of their vegetables in the winter time and in the summertime too. Vegetables were, in the winter time, you would have sprouts, kale, leeks, and in the summertime, lettuce, peas, and fruit. No one had a refrigerator or a deep freeze, and fruit was preserved either in Kilner jars or made into jam. No screw-top jars. Jars were sealed with a circle of cellophane held with an elastic band. I'm going back again. That was the ration for 2 people during the war. And you can see here, milk came in glass bottles, which were washed and put out, returned daily, used again, nothing redundant there. There were no tubs of easy spread butter, no bottles of cooking oil, no garlic, no pasta, other than there was one pasta dish we had. Do you remember? Macaroni. Marshall's macaroni. It was the only one that I can think of, but pasta is so ubiquitous nowadays that it just wasn't then. No pizzas, no quiches, no olives, no curries, no ready-made meals. The nearest ready-made meal that we had might be a tin of beans or a tin of spaghetti. Butter, margarine, and lard for cooking came wrapped in a £1 block. Margarine was the norm for baking or spreading on your piece because butter was more expensive. A treat for wains was to be given a slice of bread spread with marge and a sprinkling of sugar. I hated it, but everybody else loved it. There was no cooking oil. Lard was used for frying. Bread was delivered to the village shop on a daily basis, unsliced, of course. And to jump ahead again, to fill up hungry families, housewives would regularly bake scones, pancakes, and oatcakes on a girdle. Because what comes out of the book is that so many people kept saying, we loved food because we were hungry. So what were living conditions like in our childhood? These varied considerably in that it encompassed, I'm talking about the 1940s. These varied considerably in that it encompassed houses with no electricity and no piped water and an outside toilet. Houses with a toilet but no bath or electricity, or houses which had not only running water but a fully fledged bathroom and electricity. So there was a big variety. Keep in mind that at this time the majority of people living in the parish did not own their own homes and were reliant on their landlords. This included many farmers, the minister, the headmaster, the roadman, the nurse, the farm labourers, gamekeepers, gardeners, middy workers, all of whom were tenants. And this meant the importance of looking after the man of the house, the nurse being the exception, as being very important, because if he fell ill, the whole family could lose their house. I'm going to ask Alistair Smith to come and read a bit of his story, which reflects many of the homes at that time. Alistair lived in a fairly remote area. Oops, wait a minute, it says, sorry. A fairly remote area, and I think I was maybe going to try and get the... Yes, here we are. Here we have Kirkcudbright, bottom right. You can see where Twynholm is, and he stayed at Geagle, which was quite out on its own. Thank you, Alistair.
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm going to show another one.
Right.
That's Alistair's family.
Yes. It was quite an isolated area, although it was... I was born and brought up there, so I was. At that time, at that time, there wasn't a great deal of modern facilities, so there wasn't. At the back of the house, there was a shed, closet, and everybody used on a daily basis. The toilet paper was newspaper and cut into squares, and that did the job fine. Also at the back of the house there was another lean-to building, and it was contained wash tubs, washboards, the mangle, and a boiler. The boiler was filled, water was carried for the well, and the boiler, fire lit, and it took a while for it to heat up. And that's where the weekly wash was done, so it was. The well was located down the garden, so it was, and he carried water to do whatever, and it was also brought into the house to supply the household needs. The kitchen range would supply the hot water via pots and kettles and such alike, suspended for the swee. The range also had an oven which did the cooking, and like baths and such as baths. There was a zinc bath was brought into the house on the weekends for to bath, ready for the start of the week. At that time, light was provided by candles and paraffin lamps. As time passed, the family acquired a tilly lamp. The tilly, it was such a bright light, another one was got, and when we had visitors, it went through the other end of the house with the visitors. In place of the old smoothing iron, box smoothing iron, where he put a wedge of metal into to heat the sole, which allowed you to do the ironing and get your collar nicely done. My mother got a tilly iron, and it operated with paraffin as well. My mother also got a paraffin oven cooker kind of thing to do bacon. There was quite a lot of bacon done. It was a Valor oven, and it was located in a shed outside. This was because it emitted quite a lot of fumes, and it needed an open space for ventilation. However, one night there was a bit of commotion. The oven had gone on fire. The Valor oven had gone on fire, and it was brought under control when the fire was extinguished. In about 1953-54, our house got modernised. We then had an indoor toilet in the bathroom, indoor toilet and wash-hand basin. Water was pumped from the well, and there were sinks in the kitchen as well then. Water was pumped from the well with hand pump. And the old range was replaced with a Rayburn stove, which heated the water as well. There was still no electricity. It came about 20 years later, in about 72, 73, thereabouts. We then had electric light and power sockets. This allowed us to graduate to kettle, iron, toaster, and other things. Television came along after that. Due to my upbringing in a kind of isolated location, I'd become extremely shy. I would wander around the grounds attached to the house. There were hens, pigs, cow, calf to interact with, in addition to cats, dogs and ferrets. All without a care in the world. There was fields and woods to explore, and there was a lot of wildlife. There was a field behind the house with a wood at the top of it. There was a rookery in it, and my grandfather would say to me, "Boy, first Sunday in March, the crows start nesting." And sure enough, there was a lot of activity in the rookery. There was also hares you would see boxing, and this would be what was the Mad March hare. There was various types of trees in the woods, and one would learn what types they were, and hedgerow plants. You'd be looking out also for birds nesting. In the fields. In the fields there were whaups, peewits, skylarks, and up at the pond there were shell ducks and stankies. There were weasels, stoats and hedgehogs, and the occasional deer you would see. As we are remembering the animals and such alike, and I said earlier we had a cow and calf, there was always plenty of milk and butter, never short of eggs. When the hens were laying well, the extra eggs were put in water glass, in a pitcher and water glass, and for using later on. When a pig was killed, hams were cured with salt on a marble slab. The cured hams, when they were ready, they were rolled up and they hung from the kitchen ceiling. Other parts of the pig would go to other people. It was a fascinating time, so it was.
Great, Alistair.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. You did miss out the bit about where your grandfather emptied the dry loo. It's all right. I'll tell them.
That as well.
Yeah, his grandfather had to empty the dry closet, dig a hole up the woods and empty it, which some of you may remember. Anyhow, that reminds us of things like wells and pumps. Now, Alistair said that his well was just one you went and you dipped into, but there were a lot of water pumps in Twynholm, in the parish, Bill Service from Burbay, quote from him, "In winter, I got the service bus home from school, which cost me twopence. I got off at the bottom of the road end and walked up the track to Granny in the cottage, and I hand pumped her water every day before going home." Now, that's a hand pump. It doesn't look like the ones that I remember, but anyhow, that's the idea. I couldn't get anything better than that. But there were a number of these around. At Bowland Borg, the Watsons must have had a very, very good water source, because they pumped the water from their spring up into the house, and they were able to use water throughout the entire house, and baths, all from the well. And back Newton, certainly I remember the Cross there talking about it. There were a number of people still using the wells. In the village, there were 2 wells which weren't really used. I only remember getting water there a couple of times for an old man that wouldn't drink piped water. And there were also 2 public water spigots in the village. A dry toilet was normally in a wee shed outside in the garden, and consisted of the equivalent of an empty oil drum with a wooden seat on top. Beside it would be the ash pit. Everybody, but everybody, had a coal fire, which was raked out daily and the ashes dumped beside the shed. To avoid smells and flies, you put a shovelful of the ashes over your business. This was common, not just in Twynholm, it was common throughout Britain. Mary Cormack says, "The house had running water in the garden, but no electricity, and only a dry loo up at the top of the garden. I remember the big snows in 1947. The house was very dark because the snow was up past the windows, and Dad and Billy Gordon had to dig away the snow to get a path up to the toilet." Hands up anybody who does not ever remember either having a dry loo or visiting an old friend or relative who had one. So most of us do remember them. And this was why having a chanty or a bedpan was absolutely essential. Some of the houses in the high street here had their garden across the road and down a close. Imagine being caught short on a very wet, cold, dark winter's night. That is why they needed chanties. And I include the bedpan here because, remember, all our oldies died at home, so we needed bedpans as well for that. Incidentally, stamp your feet if you can remember the snows of 1947. Yes, it must have been one of my earliest memories was that. Alistair talked about the wash house. Before we get to the wash house, we all only had 1 bath a week. Which night was it on? Sunday night. Sunday night, ready for Monday morning. For school and for work, but also for the wash house. Because just as there was only 1 bath a week that we all had, there was also only 1 wash a week, and that was on a Monday morning. Dougie Lockett, same story as Alistair. In the kitchen was a brick-built top-loading boiler which had a coal fire in beneath to heat the water. And he says there was also a clothes-drying pulley from the ceiling for use in bad weather. There was a similar coal-fired boiler in the basement of the manse, but my only memory of its use was when my father used it to boil a beetroot. But I do remember my mother's Burco boiler. Now, this was a vast improvement because this was water, you still had to fill the thing up manually, but it was heated, the water was heated by electricity. Now, you heated the water, you then had to lift them with tongs, huge big wooden tongs, lift them into the sink on the left, dripping wet, put it through a wringer which would be in between the two sinks, and it would land in the other one where it would be rinsed, and then it would have to be put through the wringer again, and then it would have to be hung out. Now you're thinking about cotton sheets. Now cotton sheets are nothing like the easy care sheets that you have nowadays. They're blooming heavy when they're sopping wet with water. So no wonder there was only one wash day, because it was a very, very physical day, both in heating the water and then boiling all your whites, all your cottons, and lifting heavy laundry and then hanging it out and hoping that it would dry. Dougie Lockhart mentioned having a pulley. You would only have a pulley if your house had a high enough ceiling to put in a pulley, and many cottages did not have a high ceiling, and so it would be a question of draping it round and clothes horses round the fire on a wet day. Help. Oh yes, I added that one just to remind you of when we did get a toilet. And you remember the cistern high up on the wall and the chain that you pulled, not like the modern ones at all. Anyhow, to go on, clothing, all natural fibres, no nylon, no terylene, no zips, no Velcro. I'm still talking about the late 1940s. In 1940, it was still the era before easy care fabrics, and our clothes were essentially made from wool or cotton. Clothes such as blouses, shirts, underwear, socks, cotton, summer dresses would be washed on the Monday with the sheets, tablecloths, and the like. We had very few spare trousers or skirts. And if those would not go in the wash because they were often wool, they would be wiped down to get the slitters off and to keep us tidy. Do you remember that? What colour were men's pants in these days? It was always white pants. I had forgotten that, but you know, as soon as somebody mentioned it, I thought, oh, gosh, that's right. Often made out of old flour bags. And our friend Geoffrey reminded us that men's shirts in these days often had a very much longer tail at the back, which, in the absence of underpants, could be pulled around the front. Twynholm girls wore thick navy pants, and I think this was because we had to strip off, whenever we did any sort of gymnastics, PE or anything like that, you had to strip down to your blouse and pants. So I presume that's why we all wore navy pants, thick navy pants. All of us had bare legs in summer or winter, as the boys wore short trousers until they were well into secondary school, and girls wore skirts or dresses, never trousers. So in summer we had short ankle socks, and in winter we had knee-length socks held up with homemade elastic garters. So in winter it was invariably cold legs and very often chilblains. Now, here we have got a couple of Twynholm ladies. Dougie Lockhart at the far side obviously was a teenager by this stage because he had long trousers on, but everybody wore a pinny. Now, whether it was the waist pinny, and unfortunately this one is not terribly good, and I decided not to replace it. I thought, I'll stick to the Twynholm people. But it is almost like a sleeveless dress that they would wear, a pinny that was top and bottom. You can't see terribly clearly, but they've got their slippers on. What do you call them? Baffies, huh? Yeah, anyhow. So, now, we had one bath a week, but look at the knees. Everybody had to have their knees scrubbed every night. Again, the bare legs. I'm not sure what they're wearing in their feet, whether it's clogs or whether it's tackety bits. What do you think? Clogs. Clogs. Right? The wee girl on the extreme right is May Thompson, Ali Thompson's wife. May Goldie she was. School photo with quite a few faces in there that you might have recognised yourself, I'm not sure. I'll go on. This was obviously a summer photo. Aoife Roberts on your left and John Roberts. Bare legs again, you can see shorts. Ties were very commonly worn at this time. Anyhow, women too wore dresses. They didn't wear trousers of any sort, and very often they didn't wear stockings because stockings were very, very pricey and not easy to get. And in the winter time, they would sit so close to the fire. What happened? They got fire tartan, or as Joe would say, tinker's tartan was what he called it. We always called it fire tartan. And that was because, as Anna would tell you, there was only ever one person warm in the whole house, and that was the person sitting nearest the fire. Anyhow, money was short for everybody. Clothes were expensive, and all clothing had to be looked after and passed down. Almost everyone would have a set of good clothes which they might wear to church or have family visits or something like that, and they'd be taken off and put away for the next time. I can still remember Avril Thompson saying how excited she was when her mother, who was a widow, was able to buy her her first pair of white ankle socks. So money was not too available at that time. Socks. Hands up anybody that has darned a sock in the last month. Well done. What, 2? You see, darning socks was something that was absolutely essential in these days. As children, we were taught how to darn socks because it was wool and you had to keep things going. Fasteners were all buttons at this point. Metal zips were only appearing in the 1950s, and I'm not going to ask for a hands up on this one, but I imagine that a lot of you elderly gentlemen are happier that you have a zip in your trousers and you no longer have to undo your ballots in a hurry. Margaret Fortune, quote, "My mother, Mrs. Bell, was well known in the village for her dressmaking skills and especially was putting inserts into the waistbands of trousers for men who had put on weight." But zips gradually replaced buttons into the 1950s, and skirts, dresses, and all sorts of things. And along with the gradual introduction in the 50s of the top-loading electrical wash machine, with man-made fibres such as nylon and terylene gradually coming in, it revolutionised the whole housewife's workload of the wash day. Huge, huge difference in these 10 years. But what was not available was anything disposable, such as tissues for your nose or disposable nappies, not to mention soft toilet paper. Cotton hankies were a must for everybody. A very helpful innovation at this time was the humble safety pin. Interesting how something that was a vital component of a housewife's sewing box has largely disappeared. It's not disappeared, but it's not vital anymore. Many a baby must have blessed the special safety nappy pins, which were designed not to be able to burst open and prick the baby. Nappies by the mid-50s were still toweling squares, which had to be washed and dried daily. We also relied on grannies knitting a lot of her stuff for us, and we also had to knit a lot of things ourselves, including a pixie hat, or a hot water bottle cover, things like that, that you could knit a rectangle and sew up one side. That was very common, but girls had to do a lot of knitting like that. These are the clogs that were made in the village. Well, not these ones, but Mr. McNeely, who was the shoemaker, made clogs. Mary Grace, Mr. McNeely made clogs for John and myself. Yes, some of us, quite a lot of us, remember wooden clogs. But tackety boots and lacing shoes became the usual footwear in winter. Everyone had black wellies handed down, and we all had red welts in the back of our legs due to the top of the welly getting wet and rubbing on our legs. And in the summer, it was sand shoes, which in Twynholm we all called sannies, or Clark sandals. And of course, children were always one of their duties was polishing shoes. That was just to show you, most of us there were wearing sand shoes, and most of the boys are wearing Wellingtons in a school photograph. Hats. Most men, working men, wore a bonnet on the right-hand side. You've got the minister's lum hat there for funerals or weddings, or a bowler for the kirk, or a Homburg for leisure. And now we're going on to agriculture. In the late 1940s, immediately after the war, it was still very, very manual. It was still horses and men's hard work. The principal employment in the parish was agriculture, and apart from a couple of sheep farms, they were all mixed farms with a dairy of around 30 or 40 cows. In the late 40s, it expanded thereafter. This meant that they grew their own crops: tatties, kale, turnip, rape for the animals, as well as the hay and the oats or which we called corn, for the animals. In the late 40s, this was still totally reliant on manual labour supported by horses, but over the next few years, tractors very quickly replaced the horses. That's me on the top of a horse in front of the manse. Now, this is a Anna Hotchkiss picture, and in the background you can see 3 huge haystacks. Every bit of that got there by somebody with a fork, a rake or a fork. No tractors or anything there whatsoever. And that is Miles Johnson of the Stooks, again just at the end of the beaches. Again, every stook had to be gathered up, set together. A lot of hard manual labour. Dairymen were hired to be in charge of the byre and invariably came with a wife as part of the team. This posed a situation which in today's world would be completely untenable, because given that this was a husband and wife team, their children would be left in the house completely unattended. Here's a quote from Lex McMinn. "My mother's duties were numerous. One was helping at milking times, morning and night, and feeding the young calves with milk. This particular day, her last words to me were before setting off. He was looking after his little brother. Her last words before setting off to the byre were, 'Don't let the fire go out.' So he says it was an old-fashioned drain, and what I thought was a good idea was I put plenty of coals on it. Okay for a bit, but once it got going, it was frightening because the lum went on fire. Panic. I ran to the byre to tell Mum, but it just had to burn itself out." General farm labourers were involved in all the day-to-day farm work of looking after the livestock and sowing, planting, hoeing, cropping and so on, and their entire family was expected to turn out to help in busy times. Annie Kennedy says, "Wives and children were included when crops needed thinning. We either used hoes or we were on our hands and knees using our hand width to push out extra seedlings to allow the turnips to have space." And Lex McMinn, "Tatty Haugen, what a boring task, all for 10 bob note. It doesn't sound much as it's only 50p piece today. On the other hand, a 6p got you a ride in the Dodgems, and with a poke of chips for 4p, you still had change left off a bob." At this point, I will confirm that all of us youngsters had a daily routine duties expected of us, which were entirely unpaid. These might be cleaning out the fire, chopping kindlers, washing dishes, ironing, feeding hens, pigs, gathering eggs, and so on. No negotiation and no pay. That was just expected as your normal duties of the household. And as Joe will confirm, money earned by children very often went in to help the household coffers. I'm going to ask Alec Irving to give us a wee glimpse into the corn harvest.
Thank you. Right. She said I was to give it an agricultural twist. And then she goes and steals my thunder. Right, the day I was born, the middle of August 1944, they were cutting corn with a binder and 3 horses pulling it. They couldn't use the tractor then because it was a sow-out field, had tender grass below it, and you could not get rubber tyres for a tractor during the war. Is that right? Right. Then, as she said, the tractormen, or all the men's wives, worked out harvest time. There was building stooks and that, and later on these stooks were carted in with horse and cart to the stackyard, built into stacks, awaiting. Sorry, I'm doing the Alistair bit. There's one thing I need before I get any further. I can't read my own writing. I just did it this afternoon. Janet phoned me about a fortnight ago and says, "Have you
I
got
don't know what
anything
you're
done
supposed to say."
yet?" I said, "No, no hurry, because I am well out of my depth here. I was in my element at the weekend. I was at Haddington judging a ploughing match, and I loved it. I stopped ploughing myself at the start of COVID, when a lot of matches stopped. And I took up, or I was asked anyway, to do a bit of judging. I stayed in North Berwick with friends on the evening, and on Sunday morning I thought I'll just go back to the field and see how they're getting on today. Got along the field to the faraway rig, and here's the chairman. "Oh, pleased to see you. We've a job for you." What an overall judge. So I got 2 days out of it. Right, the stooks, as you saw, they're left there for maybe a fortnight to dry a wee bit, and then they were carted in with a horse, and they were built in the stackyard for the travelling mill to come round later on. And you borrowed a man or two from the neighbouring farms around, because it took quite a few men to keep the mill working. The straw was fed to the dry cows, or it was used for bedding young stock, and the grain was crushed and it was fed to the cows, calves, or sheep, pigs, and that. So cows were tied up in the byre and milked by hand in those days. Everything was hard work. It was manual work, so it was. Unlike today, when everything you push a button or you sit in your tractor. Another reinvention came here. There was a local man, Mr. Nicholson from Bombay, who invented the milking machine. It was vacuum operated, and it pulled the milk from the cows into a bucket. And then from there, the dairyman's wife would carry the milk to the dairy. It would run over a cooler and into the 10-gallon churns, which were transported by Mr. Coulthard and his wagons to Kirkcudbright Creamery. Too many pages here. So the next step up from that, we've got a pipeline milker in, which the milk went from the cow right up into a pipeline and zoom away to the dairy. So then we had to buy a bulk tank, and Coulthard's wagon was done away with, and he had to buy a bulk lorry then. And the next stage was the cows were then housed in a cubicle shed, free range, pick your own bed, and they were milked in a parlour in those days. And most recent update is there are robot milkers. The cows are free to roam, to come and go as they wish, and they can get milked up to 3 or 4 times a day. Right, cows were traditionally fed on turnips, hay, and the grain to feed them to get milk. Nowadays, it's silage and concentrates and minerals. Cows gave on average 5 or 6 gallons a day. Now it's 40 or 50 litres. They were all Ayrshires at that time, then Frisians, and now it's all Holstein, which are just a machine made to produce milk. There's two celebrities hanging in my office. I'm nearly finished, Janet. One's Joanna Lumley, because Mike and her went to a ploughing match at Ellisland a number of years ago, and before I left home, I said, she's not getting on my tractor. I had an old-fashioned Massey Harris on iron wheels, and the engine stuck right over the front, did you hear it? And it was an awkward thing to drive. It had a hand clutch, and well, once I went to load it in the lorry, and I forgot about this, and it started climbing the headboard, and but all was well. So it was a wonderful day, and mine was the only tractor that she wanted on. So, and the other celebrity hanging in my office is King Charles. I was fortunate enough to enter a competition and get into the last three, and went to go to London to meet him to get presented with a certificate. Photograph taken, so it's hanging in my office. I think I'm finished.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.
Hello again, folks. If you want to know a bit more about me, you get Janet's book, I'm the Wee Fat Fellow, on page 114, or The Boy with the Message Bike on page 102. My family moved to Twynholm just after the Queen's coronation in 1953, when I was about 10 years old. They're coming from Gators railway station, which consisted of the station, 5 houses, 2 of which didn't have children, and a disused railway carriage, which was used as a kirk, a bullion hall, and for the occasional party. So I thought that Twynholm, with shops, post office, a proper kirk, post office, the pub, concerts, dances, I thought it was just a great place to be. I thought it was a big place. But this made me smile years later. Working in central London, I realised that maybe I was a bit premature. But moving into a newly built council house in 28 the Doon was also quite a change in lifestyle. Although the street lighting hadn't been put into the village, the new houses had electricity. So no more using a torch to go to the toilet at the back of the station platform. Hot water and tap, provided that the fire was on to heat the back boiler. Although I did miss the station because your bath used to be in front of the fire and it was comfortable, whereas you had hot water, but the room was pretty cold. To show you how exciting it was, my brother and I thought it was so fantastic. When we first arrived there, we used to argue about whose turn it was to switch the light off before we went to bed. Now, I mentioned earlier about my failure with the Rose House. My finances improved when I got a job at the shop as a message boy. I got £1, 3 shillings for an hour at night and all day on Saturday. This increased to 30 shillings for a full day or a full week during the school holidays. And I never worked out whether I was overpaid during the school term or underpaid during the school holidays. But I was quite happy. The average wage then was under £10, so to be able to give my mother £1 towards the household was a reasonable contribution. And again, I was happy. The 3 bob left gave me enough to get a half-price return ticket into Kirkcudbright, go to the pictures, and still have enough for a poke of chips on the way home. When I first went to the shop, there was no refrigeration, as you would imagine, and it was devoid of the loads of unnecessary packaging that we get today. Any package necessary was usually put in the ubiquitous brown paper poke. The shop was used by practically everybody in the village, not only for their groceries, but to read the cards hung in the wire across the window giving hatch, match and dispatched and upcoming events. Although by the time I'd got the job, rationing had been officially abandoned, folks were still rationed either through lack of stuff or because they were hard up. As well as the groceries, the shop stock quite a wide variety of stuff used for day-to-day living. Paraffin, as many folks still needed it for heating and lighting. Methylated spirits was available, but you had to sign for it. Biggest difference between grocery shopping and today's shopping is obviously the lack of choice. Bacon was either smoked or unsmoked, sliced off usually in £1/4 or £1/2 packaging. Boiled ham was available, but presumably because of the price, it was purchased in slices, and it was not unusual for folk to order 2 slices of boiled ham. Corned beef came from £7 tins and was sliced in a slicer, and I don't recall any small tins of meat other than Spam. Cheese from the creamery came from the creamery in £56 bandaged blocks and was sliced off with wire. Sugar and flour came in bulk. Flour went into quarter-stone bags and sugar into £2 bags. There was a way of folding the bag to keep the contents intact without using either string or tape. Now, I didn't mind weighing the sugar, but I hated wearing the flour. Not only did I not like the feel, but I always went home looking like a snowman. Another test for a message boy was to keep papers dry in the pouring rain, because squeezing wet papers through letter boxes resulted in paper mache. Fortunately, folk in Twynholm were honest, and there's very few people locked their door, so it was easy enough to slip it through. Discretion was an essential part of a message boy's job. Women were more modest then and more private about their personal requirements. It was not unusual to be called and handed a letter with instructions to give it to Johnny Gray, the boss. He would then open it, tell me to put a packet of sanitary towels in a brown paper poke and take them back to the woman that had waved me down. When delivering messages, I sometimes got a 2p or 3p tip, which was much appreciated. And I certainly remember my first Christmas as a message boy. I accumulated the magnificent sum of £7 10 shillings, which enabled me to buy my first suit with long trousers. The buying power of £7 10 equates to £267 today. It's 32 years since Mrs. Quin and I appeared on stage together. She was Cinderella good. I was trying to look regal, and a pair of my sister's knickers stuffed with newspaper pulled over a pair of tights. So it's back to you, Cinderella.
Anna, I think that time is passing on, so I think we'll skip the next bit and just go on to your talk. It doesn't fall over. No, it'll not fall over. Great. Anna's just, because things are sort of slightly, we are running over, Anna's really going to read give you a very general picture of growing up in Twynholm. All sorts of little bits and pieces.
That's what it is, bits and pieces. In 1948, I was 9 when our family moved to the Mark Farm up the hill road from Twynholm. And for me, it was wonderful after living 3 years in Warrington amongst the bomb sites. We arrived in early summer, and the first thing I remember about it was that the farmhouse was being altered, and Sidney Clacharty and his men were bashing down walls and singing, "Put another nickel in the Nickelodeon. All I want is loving you and music, music, music." Such a cheery lot. And the other thing that I remember about that was my mother wouldn't allow me to have syrup on my porridge anymore. She said that now I was living in Scotland, that Scottish people didn't have syrup on their porridge. So that was that. She threw herself into farming life and joined the rural and made a lot of friends. In 1948, the headmaster at the school was a Mr. Scott, and his wife, Mrs. Scott, taught P4 and P5. Mr. Scott was a Scottish history fanatic, and we learned a lot of Scottish songs. Mrs. Good, Janet's mother, taught P1, 2 and 3, and also Scottish country dancing, Paddy Ba, Skip Change of Step, Poussette, and the Cumberland Reel. We had a sewing teacher called Miss Wallace, no relation to me, and we were making huge knickers out of winceyette material, which nobody would ever wear. And at one point, Miss Wallace left the room to speak to the headmaster. And Mary Grace Anderson, who was a friend of mine, tried on Miss Wallace's fur coat and a hat and went prancing about in the classroom. And of course, Miss Wallace came back and caught her. And of course, there was a great lot of trouble, and we thought it was hilarious. I was always in trouble because I was talked too much. And I spent a lot of time in disgrace between the library cupboard and the blackboard, which anybody who was at the school in Twynholm will remember. The games we played at school, or I played at school, were mainly skipping games, one at each end, coin the rope, and one or two people jumping in as we sang rhymes, like vote, vote, vote for so-and-so. Here comes somebody at the door, and then somebody else jumped in, and the first one jumped out, but it was very tricky. I played a lot of ball bouncing against a wall in time to some rhymes, but I can't remember the words. It's a good job. We did handstands against the wall too, but I was no good at running. At home at the Mark, we were very lucky as we had a nice house and a garden and a proper bathroom and a phone, Twynholm 209, and a car. We grew a lot of vegetables and fruit, and I don't remember there being any problems at all, but there was no such thing as a fridge or a freezer, so you had to eat everything that was on your plate, and the leftovers were made into something for the next day. And there was no such thing as a choice. We had a bath and got our hair washed, as Janet said, on a Sunday night, ready for school on a Monday. And all the girls in my class had long hair and pleats, and it took such a long time to dry your hair in front of the fire. The big thing was getting your hair cut when you were 12 to go to Kirkcudbright Academy. The Twynholm bypass was not there at all, and traffic was so light that it was safe to cycle anywhere we liked. And Sheena Ferguson, who was my friend, and I spent many happy days touring round the Stewartry on our bikes. For our summer holiday, my mother rented a hut at Sand Green with no facilities. Lots of people that we knew did the same thing, the Good family included. Nobody went abroad in an aeroplane, absolutely nobody. I cycled there as there was virtually no traffic on the main road, and we had a great time playing with all the other families who went to Sand Green. We all played rounders at night and jumped off the diving board into the sea when the tide was in. The diving board is no longer there, and there were no caravans at all. The Easter holidays I spent at Myfield helping out, as I thought, with the lambing, which I absolutely loved. And sometimes we played kick the can and chased an empty boot polish tin down the burn from the dam to the bridge. And in the summer, we swam in the dam, and Sheena and I once made a raft with planks and empty cans and tried to float it, but it didn't work. One summer day, Sheena and I went down the burn past Ashland, and Sheena showed me where the Tinker family were smothered to death when the banking caved in on them. And I've never been there since. But there's a monument in Twynholm churchyard that was erected from public subscription for the Tinker family. The guides was a big thing in my life, and we were very lucky to have Mrs. Clacherty for guide captain. In the guides, we were lucky also to be able to go to Berwinock and make fires and gadgets and do tracking. And in the spring, we all went to gather snowdrops, and we tied them up in bunches with green string, and Mr. and Mrs. Good took them up to Edinburgh for the soldiers who were in the hospital after the war. We also collected loads of sphagnum moss for dressings in the hospitals. And every year we went to camp at Cardiness near Gatehouse. We piled all the equipment onto Sidney Clacherty's lorry, and we sat on the back with it until we got there. There was absolutely no health and safety, but it was good fun. The village hall was the hub of the social life in the village. There was the rural, whist drives, guides, concerts, bowling, and probably a lot more. Lizzie Cruikshanks was the organiser of the concerts, and there were small plays, singing, and my mum did recitations. One of her famous ones was The Highwayman. And I can remember Mrs. McLaughlin once singing, "Your Cheating Heart." I thought she was very exotic. She had a short black skirt and a white satin blouse and high heels. Sandy Ferguson and I were in the church choir, and on Friday night we went down to Mr. Brown's, who was the organist at the time, to practice the hymns for Sunday. You wouldn't get teenagers doing that now. I remember staying at Mary Grace's house once, and we were sent off to the church on the Sunday. And we dilly-dallied all the way down from Duncroft, and were late, and the door was shut. So instead of going in, we hid in there was a yew tree in the churchyard, and we hid there and waited till everybody came out. And then we went home, but we kept the collection, and I still feel guilty. I remember the school ladies, school dinner ladies, Mrs. Liebody and Mrs. DL, and I loved the jam sponge and custard. I thought the school dinners were great. It must have been very difficult for them, but there was still rationing going on at that time. We got a small bottle of milk every morning, which some people didn't like, but I did. And we got cod liver oil and malt out of a huge brown jar. I liked that too. I liked everything. There was no such thing as going out for a meal or a coffee. There was no garden centres. My parents' life, social life, was going to friends to play cards and have a supper. I remember going to the manse once and playing pirates on the dining room table, which was the ship, and jumping off, wielding pretend swords and things. I vaguely remember Coronation Day. My dad was in charge of the finances for the celebrations. There were sports in the glebe field, and we all got a silver teaspoon with the Queen's head on it. I remember digging up what we called groundnuts. It's a little plant with a white flower, and we ate the roots. These groundnuts grew in the glebe field. We also ate sourdouks, which was sorrel from the hedgerows, and we also ate fresh leaves off the hawthorn bushes. I remember waiting for the taxi after the school, and sometimes going up to the smiddy to keep warm in the winter. And there was a bread van that came round, after school, and they gave us anything that was left in the van, which we ate because we were hungry. I think we paid a halfpenny. I remember how kind and welcoming people were in Twynholm, especially the families living up the Glen Gap Road. I was very soon at home, and it was a very happy time in my life.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was just a roundup of all sorts of things. I'm not going to talk about holidays and things like that, but here you can see a sand green group, and there on the extreme right you can see Anna with her long pigtail. Some of you might recognise Rita Baird, and in front of her Susie, and also her big sister. And the bottom, very bottom right is Liz Dodds, who was Liz Armstrong. And there's another one that you might recognise people in. Who's the guy with everybody on top of them? It's Willie McKell. Right, Willie McKell. I think the one on the left is Derek Robb. Bottom is Ewan Lawson, whom not many of you may remember, and a couple of Baird boys. The Bairds were great sand cream people. Sorry, I think that's it. Anyhow, that's just a wee brief idea of what it was like growing up in the, sorry, I suddenly realise I'm not standing in the right place. That's just a wee idea of what it was like, some of the things, in the late 1940s and the early 1950s. It was a period of enormous change. It was a period when it went from manual labour to mechanised labour. It had the National Health Service being introduced in 1948. It had almost all the houses having running water and bathrooms by 1955, almost all of them. So that it was a period of great change, but it was also a huge change in the little things. Sorry, I'm going back here. Like the importance of nappy pin, not just nappy pins, safety pins, and elastic, because remember in the Victorian times, your underwear was buttoned onto your vests, and the introduction of man-made fibres. So there were lots and lots of things happening over that period of time. And it's very often the little things that are important to the ordinary people, not the huge thing, yes, the huge thing, but also all the little things as well. So we'll leave it there for tonight and just say thank you all for coming along. I want to say thank you to Anna, thank you to Joe, thank you to Alec, and thank you to Alistair. Thank you.